Welcome to Moveable Dough. This is Steve Danielson. Join me each week as we explore the minds of living composers. We talk about their lives, their musical journeys, and of course, their music. For a complete archive of episodes as well as access to the shorter segments called Movable Snippets, visit my website sdcompose.com/movabledough. Hey, this is Steve. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Moveable Dough. My guest today is Katerina Gimon. Katerina has been described by ArtsFile as one of the most exciting young vocal composers in Canada. She is a composer, improviser, vocalist, and a founding member of a dynamic new music and AR/VR collective, Chroma Mixed Media. Katerina holds an honors Bachelor of Music degree in Composition and Improvisation from Wilfrid Laurier University and a Master of Music in Composition from the University of British Columbia. She has won 2 SOCAN Awards and a Barbara Pentland Award for Outstanding Composition. Katerina Gimon, welcome to Moveable Dough.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I'd like to start today actually by talking about Chroma Mixed Media that I mentioned in the bio. So I was really intrigued by this company or project, or I'm actually not sure what to call it. I watched several videos on the Chroma site and became even more interested. So can you tell us about Chroma Mixed Media?
Sure. So that is a good question. I think nowadays we refer to it more as a collective. When Chroma first started, we were Chroma Ensemble, and it was comprised of me, Brian Top, and David Storin, and we were all studying composition at the University of British Columbia, where I was doing my master's, and we were all interested in improvisation. I loved performing and improvising live. Brian was doing his doctorate in interactive music technology, so he loved processing things live and doing live electronics. And David was a visual artist who was interested in projection art. So we thought this is a perfect opportunity. Kat can perform, we can do some live visuals, and Brian can make us some cool electronic instruments. We messed around. We did a number of gigs for that for a number of years. And it basically, things went from there. We ended up applying for a number of grants. We have a wonderful granting federal agency called Canada Council for the Arts here in Canada, who supported us when we decided we wanted to venture outside of that world of interactive live music into the world of installation music. And when I say that, our first venture was exploring how we could essentially create our first album in virtual reality. So we made this album, but we wrote it in such a way that it was almost video game-esque with layers. So when David created the visual experience in VR, people could actually go through with a headset on their head our album and walk through this visual environment. And, if they were in a cave, it would sound more reverby. Depending on how fast they progressed through it, the music would go slower or quicker, and different things would be triggered at different times. That was our first foray, and now we're doing all sorts of different things. VR opera in the works in collaboration with some different groups. Next up on the docket, we're doing a set of solo works for augmented reality and voices. So a whole whack of things, but that sort of opened a can of worms doing that specific first album project. And that's called Naona, if anyone wants to look it up. We have the full 360 video online, as well as the VR, if anyone has a headset and wants to check it out. But so many cool things have come from that. That's Chroma Mixed Media if you want to look it up.
Fantastic. Well, I definitely want to see where that goes in the future. So you currently live in Vancouver, British Columbia, but you mentioned to me that you're a pretty recent West Coast transplant. So where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Burlington, Ontario, which is a sort of southern Lake Ontario edge, not too far off from Buffalo. That's sort of where I used to always travel. Buffalo, New York, whenever I'd cross the border and wanted to go shopping growing up. But I grew up there, basically stayed there and until I went off to university not too far off in Kitchener-Waterloo, which is about 45 minutes away. And then I transplanted myself here to do my master's degree in 2015, it would be. I guess it's almost been 7 years now, but it doesn't feel like that because there was a pandemic in the middle of it,
right,
where I didn't really get to see anything. But it still feels very recent. I'm still, I think, at heart, a little bit of an Ontarian based person. So
sure. So when you were growing up, did you always aspire to be a musician, or did you want to be something else?
Oh, I wanted to be a singer and a rock star.
Nice.
I wrote all kinds of little lyrical ditties. I'll tell you this one. My mom will think this is funny. She has this little piece of paper. I was a terrible speller as a child, as many of us are. And I wrote on this little piece of paper that I'd posted somewhere that I want to be a singer, but I couldn't spell singer. So I wrote, I want to be a sinner. And my mom doesn't. So my mom won't throw it out. But anyways, I wanted to be a singer is the long and short of the story. Long and short of the story. And I wrote all kinds of little songs for myself and sort of lived in the songwriter world from a number of years. And then only really ventured into the world of writing music in the classical realm, actually, when I went to study my undergraduate degree.
Uh-huh. So what sort of songs were you writing growing up?
When I was really little, all the stuff about, food and, my little brother being annoying and that kind of thing. But as I got older and deeper into it, I was very into sort of folk singer songwriter, piano poppy kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote a lot of things where I would sing and play along on the piano, sort of inspired by Vanessa Carlton era. Everyone will remember 1,000 Miles. Everyone in my age group was all learning how to play that,
Yeah.
and so I did all kinds of fun piano pieces where I would sing along with it. Later, I was listening to an artist called Regina Spektor, who I'm not sure
Mm-hmm.
you know. Yeah,
Yeah.
she's absolutely fantastic. A little bit more vocal exploration, but then in that realm as well. I also I explored guitar for a little bit, but I didn't quite like it as much, and ended up settling on ukulele. I'll move a little bit so you can see it behind me.
I see that.
I
Yeah.
have an electric ukulele that I started exploring doing looping and live performances with a little bit later, getting me a bit more into that sort of folk, Joni Mitchell-esque kind of style a little bit later. But yeah, folk indie pop, I'd kind of say.
So then what was your first sort of foray into quote unquote classical composition?
When I went to study at my undergraduate degree, I I think at that point I'd done some really small compositional exercises with my theory teacher, like prepping to go to my undergraduate degree. So I'd written little studies in different modes for the piano.
Mm-hmm.
That was the only experience I had. But when I started at my undergraduate degree and I took an elective in composition, we started doing these really interesting assignments where we would zero in on very specific things, like write a minute of an aleatoric work, write a minute piece that only uses one note, write a minute piece that doesn't use notes, all these sort of fun challenges. And that really got me thinking about music in different ways. And I had so much fun. At the very end of that class, at the end of our first year, we got a free for all after all these limiting assignments. And I wrote a piece called Boundless. And that was the first sort of full scale choral/classical work that I'd written, my first choral work. And it's still performed today. It's gotten some edits since then, but it's actually been the title track for 2 albums, which is pretty exciting. And it's been recorded on, I think, 3 now. But that was really the start for me. There is when I wrote that piece, I thought, okay, now I've sort of married this world of songwriting that I'm interested in, this world of choral music and writing all in one.
Oh, fantastic. So on your website, you mentioned that one of your influences in writing is actually Eastern European folk music. So is there a particular Eastern European country that resonates more with you? What, where does this come from?
Yeah, it's funny because you're saying that and people can't see us, but I'm actually
Oh,
wearing a
yeah.
little shirt with a Ukrainian flag on it. So I'm actually Ukrainian Canadian.
Okay.
3 out of 4 of my grandparents came from Ukraine during/shortly after the war. And I think just because of the time period and just Ukrainian people in general, we're always very, very proud of our culture and continuing those traditions, especially because, they were silenced and are continuing to be silenced for so long. So at a very young age, I was in Ukrainian school, learning all the Ukrainian songs, learning to speak Ukrainian, and then did Ukrainian dance. So, of course, Ukrainian dance and Ukrainian music are very interconnected in folk singing styles. So I got exposed to a lot of that very early on. So huge part of that through my family. But then also when I joined children's choir, the conductor that conducted our choir, Zemfira Polos, was from Kazakhstan. So she brought a lot of music, from Russia and sort of other Eastern European music, Balkans, and whatnot that we sang in our choir as well, which was a little bit less common, I think, for North American and Canadian choirs. But it was just because that's literally where she had just come from. So
Mm-hmm.
between the two of those, I actually got exposed to, at a very young age, a lot of both choral and just sort of folk musics from Eastern Europe, which I think has continued to influence the kind of music I write.
Yeah, how do you see that influence in your music today?
Definitely a lot of modal kind of writing. I really like my open octaves and fifths. I mean, that's pretty
Uh-huh.
common for a lot of folk music, but also bright singing styles. We also have a very strong tradition of women singing. If you like Google just Ukrainian women singing, you can find a wonderful project called the Polyphony Project
Mm-hmm.
that where they go around to different villages in Ukraine and they capture people singing traditional folk music. A lot of it is women, and they just let it out. They have these beautiful, strong, just free voices, and so I always try and find ways in my choral music, even though it's North American, to try and get closer to that sound. So I'll often in my scores for anyone who's sung them say things like folk-like style or bright singing, so it can get closer to that style while still being understood by people who are trained in Western classical singing.
Fantastic. So you're still a fairly young composer, not too far removed from grad school. So are there teachers or maybe particular lessons that you remember that you feel are still serving as guides along your journey today?
Yes, I had a lot of wonderful teachers. I'm going to say this is an accidental one, but when I studied at Wilfrid Laurier, I studied with Glenn Buhr. He was my first composition professor there. Um, and reflecting back, I was doing a podcast recently and I realized this. At some point, he told me when I was struggling that writer's block didn't exist. And I remember at the time being very confused by that, and not sure how to take that. But then years later, realizing what he was trying to say is essentially, um, I don't know if you find this because I know you're a composer as well,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of the time when you get stuck, it's not because you don't have an idea, it's because you're overwhelmed with possibilities. There's too many things you could do, and you actually need to go back a step into that planning stage, into that brainstorming stage, and figure out where you're going to go. So that's something that sort of took a little bit of a roundabout turn for it to finally settle in. I think for me to get to a point in my career where that advice he gave me made sense. But that's something, especially recently, I think that's been really, really, really impactful for me is learning that lesson.
I like that. That's really
Mhm.
nice. So do you have a bucket list of compositions that you'd like to write one day? Like for me, I'd love
Oh.
to one day write a symphony. So if you had unlimited time and resources, what would be on your bucket list of things to compose?
One thing that's always been on my bucket list that I'm going to say, just in case somebody can make this happen, is I've always been very interested in spatial music and music in site specific music, music in strange places. And I sort of want to combine that with my, weird choral style. So I've always dreamt of doing a piece in a cave, like a
Mm.
big cave, like a vocal, maybe like a vocal small chamber ensemble or a vocal octet or something like that in a cave, and like writing a large scale piece for the cave where you maybe can, fit a small audience or a handful of people, but they experience this in this really resonant, kind of cool, unique space. So that's one idea that I really want to make happen.
All right. So if anyone's got a cave out there, let
Yeah,
Katerina know.
invite me over. We'll make cave music.
All right. So I did mention earlier that you had moved to Vancouver recently. So what have you found about your new home in Vancouver that excites you or that you've particularly enjoyed?
Oh, that's a good question. Definitely. First off, I'll say the environment, like the what would it be, the physical environment, the nature all around here. I absolutely love. I grew up sort of just outside of Toronto, and it's the most populated area of Canada. So it's just sort of city, more city sprawling for a while. And people used to, I remember on weekends, line up to drive several hours to sit in traffic to like go to cottage country to find a tree. Or to find a bit of retreat. And that was just the thing we did. But when I moved out here, um, Vancouver is the big city and it ends a lot quicker.
Uh-huh.
And you can get to this place of, because we're surrounded by mountains, of course.
Right.
It has to end. You can only build so high. You can find, I think, that state of relaxation and escape and find yourself in nature a lot quicker, which I really like. You can both be near a city, but also have amazing places to hike, amazing places to see a wonderful view, to be immersed in nature and like not hear any noise pollution. So I love that. I'm a huge I like to walk and hike as well. So I've been sort of slowly exploring all the trails since I've moved here. And that's been, especially during the pandemic, that's been, I think, really, really, really wonderful. But in addition to that, I will also say the choral music community and music community in general here is so rich, so welcoming, and so diverse. And I think it's part of the reason that my career really started when I got here, is because of that environment and the diversity that we have in this area. So although technically I grew up in an area where it was more populated, I ended up here and things really branched out since I got here, I think because of that.
Well, fantastic. Well, you and I are just down the road from each other, so we need to hook up at some point.
I know. I haven't been like anywhere along that part of the United States, so we will definitely have to.
That's right. So one last question before we take a quick break, and this is a question I've been asking all my guests this season. Who is another living composer that you think we should all go check out?
Living. My go-to just passed away, so I will not say that. Um, if you probably already know her, but I would say Carolyn Shaw. I've always been really, really intrigued by her music. I think because in a way it's similar to the kinds of things that I do that combine improvisation and texture and whatnot. I came across her music when I was sort of later in my undergrad, and I've always been very interested in that. Oh, her. But I will also add, sorry, I should also mention this. Tanya Tagaq. She is a Inuit throat singer and performer slash composer in Canada. Also check out her music. It's absolutely stunning, very inspiring. Check out her work as well.
What was last name?
Tanya Tagaq.
Tagaq. All right.
Yeah, so she won the Polaris Prize a number of years ago, but has gone on to do all kinds of collaborations, even with I don't know if you probably know Kronos Quartet, the famous string quartet. She's done collaborations with them where she sort of has created this work that is like throat singing, but for string quartet, and it's just so unique and so different and so beautifully bringing back this culture that in North America has been from colonialism just silenced. So very beautiful. I encourage you to look her up.
All right, will do. All right, well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll listen to some of Katerina's compositions. Hey, Steve here. I want to take just a moment of our time together to tell you about the easiest way to make and host a podcast. It's called Anchor. I use Anchor to make and host Moveable Dough, and I've been extremely happy with the experience. They have creation tools on the site that help you create, record, publish, and share your podcast to multiple podcast streaming sources, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and more. The best part, it's absolutely free. No monthly cost, no hidden fees. So if you've been thinking about making a podcast, and you know you have, download the Anchor app today or visit anchor.fm to get started. Thanks for listening, and let's get back to Moveable Dough. Welcome back. I'm talking today with Katerina Gimon. We're going to start today with Fire from your piece, The Elements. So this is the third of 4 movements set for treble choir. This piece is fast and energetic, incorporating vocal percussion, body percussion, nasal singing, nonsense syllables, and more. I'd love you to tell us about the whole work and how Fire fits into it.
Yeah, so this work was actually written when I was studying at Wilfrid Laurier doing my undergrad. It was the first 3 movements, I think, were written in my second year, so not too long after that piece I mentioned earlier, Boundless. This was the next choral work I wrote after that. And then the final piece in the set was written, I think, at the beginning of my 3rd year, but pretty early in my writing journey, which a lot of people don't realize. And my goal when writing this piece was to create something that could explore the bounds of the human voice. So, in the first movement, we have overtone singing. In the movement we're about to hear, Fire, the 3rd movement, we have this nasal singing, shouts, calls, non-traditional choral singing kind of aspects. And then also to convey an image or an idea without using text in the traditional sense. And this is something I became a little bit obsessed with after growing up singing in children's choir and having this really beautiful experience where I sang. I have a little good luck charm that I'll show you as I tell you this story. I sang a concert in Germany with my choir. And at the very end of the concert, for every show we did as part of this tour, we would go out and we'd hold hands with people in the audience and we'd sing looking into their eyes, which was terrifying for me as the shy introvert I was. But I had this beautiful experience singing to this elderly German woman. I didn't speak German. She didn't speak English. But after I had sung this piece to her, she was just tearing up the whole time. And it was the first time I'd felt this overflowing and immense sense of, connection among two people who didn't know each other. I didn't know anything about her. We didn't speak the same language. And after that, she pulled out of her pocket this heart-shaped stone. And I never got to know the story again because we never spoke the same language, but she took my hand and she put it in my hand and then closed my hand around it as if to motion for me to take it. And so this has always been my good luck charm since then, reminding me of, why I do what I do, but also the power of connection to connect people regardless of where they're from, what their beliefs are, and so on. So all that story, to circle back to elements and say that I was obsessed with the idea of connecting people beyond language. So I didn't include any language in this. The words you're going to hear in Fire are actually a set of nonsense syllables that I created via improvisation. I was more interested in finding a way to convey the idea of each element, in this case, fire, without using words. So I'll leave it at that. And then I will just make one more note because you said it's for SSA. I will just mention that it was originally written for SATB, just so SATB groups don't feel left out. And I did also make a TTBB version of Fire recently, in case any of them are interested in joining in. Everyone can join in the fun.
All right. And I understand that this piece recently went viral on TikTok. Is that correct?
It did. It's
How
a sentence.
When did that happen?
It's a sentence I never thought I'd say is, hey, something of mine went viral on TikTok, but it happened. I think it was in June or July. It's sort of been ongoing because it just bubbles and then it finds its way to a different form of social media. Like then it's YouTube, then it's Facebook. But essentially, there was a wonderful performance by the Texas Music Educators Treble Honor Choir. Very long name. I think I got it right. The 2022 iteration. They performed it in February, and I got all these messages from people who were there live saying, this performance, it was fantastic. It's so amazing. Didn't hear anything for a while after that. The performance emerged, and then I guess it found its way first onto TikTok and really resonated with young people, seeing this fantastic group of young people just letting go, letting their inner rage out, letting their inner fire out, for sorry for the pun, but it's true. Once you watch the piece, you'll see what I mean. And I think because of that, it really resonated with so many people and just sort of made waves because of that performance. So, yeah.
All right. Well, we are going to actually listen to the 2022 Texas All-State Treble Choir conducted by Dr. Linda Hassler singing Fire. All right, our next piece today is A Path to Hope. So this is a set of 3 short works for a cappella choir that you wrote during the pandemic. I'd love for you to talk a minute about what inspired this piece and especially about the text, both sung and spoken.
Yeah, so I think some of my favorite pieces always seem to be sets, which is funny because the last one we heard was a set of 4 works, and this one's a set of 3 works. Mind you, they're much shorter, but the piece itself is about this idea of finding hope in difficult times. Of course, this makes sense, given that it was written during the pandemic, but it was written as part of a project, a collaborative commissioning project called Sonic Time Lapse Project. And I was a co-founder of this project. And essentially what we did is we commissioned 10 composers over the period of a year to create works. But these works were based on reflections taken from members of the choral community, mostly people in the Canadian choral community. So that when these pieces all came out at the end, it showed a time lapse of the emotional landscape of people during the pandemic. That was the idea. So very weird, very unique idea. My piece was the first one to come out, so it was very early. A lot of the reflections that my piece were based on were actually taken from choral conductors, speaking about, how changed their world was, the loss of their livelihood, not knowing if, these beautiful moments that they had conducting choirs would ever happen again. It was really heartbreaking to read a lot of this stuff, especially at a time when I was also feeling so much of that myself. So it was, truly a journey in writing it. But I ended up creating this work based on those reflections. And because I loved the material I got so much, I cheated. Instead of writing one work, I wrote 3 small ones. The first movement is called Without Voice, and it's entirely for body percussion. And it's based on the Morse code spelling for the word voiceless. And it was based on all these reflections that I found about people saying, I don't feel like I have a voice anymore. Singing is where I let out all my emotions. It's where I felt like I was home, and I don't have that anymore. So I wove some of those reflections you'll hear before and after the actual piece happens, but it's based on that. And then the body percussion is saying voiceless, essentially, in the rhythm, very loosely based on that Morse code. That's the first movement. Then the second movement is called The Fear, and it's loosely based on, or inspired by, I should say, a poem by Canadian poet Pat Lowther that was included in one of the reflections that was sent to me. And it's about facing the fear itself. So there's this super short repeated mantra that I came up with about facing the fear, and essentially working up the strength to accept that change happens in our life, and change is growth, and we can make it through together. And then the final movement, Believe, is actually the first one I wrote, funny enough. Although it was the third movement, it was the first piece I wrote. And I like to describe this one like if I was sitting in a room with some of those people who the reflections that inspired the work existed. A lot of the things that I was reading were like, I don't know what's next, what will happen, I don't see hope. A lot of darker things that were happening at the time, and I think things that people were feeling. And if I was sitting in a room with those people, I thought, what would I say? What would I say if a friend said this to me? And so Believe, I wrote the lyrics and the music as a response to those people and those things that I saw in these reflections. So it's basically saying that, believe that we're going to make it through this, and that we'll be stronger, and we will appreciate what we do. And I think the role of art so much more after all of this. So that is the set, A Path to Hope.
All right. Well, as a music educator, I definitely, resonated with all the messages there. All right. Well, we're going to listen to the full 3 movement work, A Path to Hope, performed here by Myriad Ensemble.
Don't speak.
Don't touch.
Don't breathe.
Don't move. There will be no singing anymore. It's out of our control.
No one is listening.
Don't speak. Don't touch. Don't breathe. Don't move.
No singing. The world is silent. Still, without voice, we sing.
What scares me the most is not knowing what the future holds. The lack of certainty, of control. Some days, I'm not sure how long I can keep holding on under the pressure. I wonder if this will ever end, if we'll ever sing together again, or if all my experiences will become nothing more than memories. My fear is that the world will change and I'll stay the same.
It's not the change, it's not the change, it's not the change, but the fear that holds me down. It's not the change, it's not the change, it's not the change, but the fear that holds me down.
We believe that while we stay in place, the power of song transcends beyond an isolated existence. During the pandemic, music has been our building block of hope. A catharsis, a reason to gather, even virtually. A shared experience, a shared breath. A place where love was kindled and dreams were planted. An escape from the pressure cooker pandemic feelings. A joy, a community, a sisterhood of song. In overcoming this adversity, we, Myriad, and the choral community can discover our own resilience and look brightly towards a day when we will return with renewed strength, greater appreciation for our art, and understanding of our importance and place in our changed world. We look forward to the future, and we believe. Do you believe?
All right, next we're going to turn to All Together We Are Love. So what is this piece about, and why do you think it resonates with audiences today?
So this is a very nice, sweet, simple message. Literally, like the title says, that all together we make the world a brighter and more beautiful place, with being ourselves, with the art we make, and so on. And it was originally written for Electra Women's Choir's choral leadership workshop for young women in 2017. And the goal that I was given for this piece is that they were having this day-long workshop with several choirs, different levels, different ages coming in, and they needed something they could learn in 20 minutes. 20 minutes, that's all I had. But they also wanted something that would empower everyone to feel inspired, to feel creative, and to leave a little bit of space to play. At the time, I was already sort of known a little bit for incorporating aleatory. So there's a little glimpse of that, which is a good starter place if you've never done that with your groups in this piece. This is a great one to start with that. So that's where that piece came from. But I think this idea of it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what you do. Together, it's our unique individuality that makes the world more beautiful and rich and wonderful. I think that resonates with people regardless of, what your age is and whatnot. So this one's a great one for different groups. I think we're listening to an SATB version of it, if I'm not mistaken. But it also exists in SSA. So there's a couple different voicings I'll just mention.
All right. So how do you think the aleatory section sort of plays into the meaning of the piece?
I think for me, the way I sort of looked at it, because I wrote the lyrics for this one as well, the opening section is sort of about celebrating your individuality and, I can do all these things. Look at all these things I can do. But together it makes it more beautiful. Then we come to this aleatoric section in the middle. That's a little bit like searching. It's a little bit like searching and wandering. So that's what I imagine. I think I even have some text along the line and descriptor text in the middle there in the score. But it's this idea of searching and then maybe finding strength when you come back to, the people around you, your choral community, your community around you, and saying, you know what, I searched, I've tried to find who I am. I tried to find my purpose. And then here I am back. And I realized that we have our strengths together.
I love that. All right. Well, we're going to listen to All Together We Are Love, performed here by Consinity. And our last piece today, In Her Image, for SSAA a cappella choir. You say that this piece is a celebration of sisterhood as well as an exploration of individuality within a collective. So what do you mean by this?
So this one, I think this is actually the first one that I commissioned a text for on our list today. But the text for this one, I guess I'll start off by saying that it's written by a dear friend of mine, Lauren Pete, who's a wonderful poet. And because the world is super small and life is a full circle, we actually grew up singing together in the Hamilton Children's Choir, that children's choir I mentioned. So after all these years, life brought us back together, and this was our first collaboration of many, actually. But I got approached by Sirens to write this piece for their album, and themes of empowerment, trying to find yourself, that kind of thing. And so I approached Lauren, and she basically went running with this. And the way she likes to describe the piece, she said this to me once, and I've been saying it to people now because I think it's so beautiful, is the poetry and the meaning of the piece is almost like losing the pieces of yourself and picking them back up again. And when you read through the text of the piece, you'll see the way the story sort of unfolds. It's this person, they're searching for themselves and they're looking, and they actually start pretty close to themselves. I think they're in a nearby glade. For example, I think it's in the first stanza. And then as it goes on, they look further and further, and the music sort of gets more frantic, more searching, a little more tension in the music, because as they get further away, they're actually getting further away from who they are and what they're searching for. And then in that middle section where we move from this sort of state of complexity to actually the choir moving to this unison moment, it's like the snap into finding strength in your choral community, in your sisterhood in this case. And then realizing that where you started, where she was in the very beginning, is actually where she was the whole time. It was there all along, who she was. She just had to listen for it. She just had to look and discover that it was there all along. So that's essentially the story of In Her Image.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we're going to listen to Sirens Choir performing In Her Image.
I had all but lost her image. When something in me settled and glanced back, something in me settled and glanced back.
Well, Katerina, what are you working on now that you can tell us about?
Ooh, I'm working on a fun project right now, a bit unusual, but a set of 3 graphic scores or quasi-graphic scores intended for groups who are interested in exploring graphic scoring or being introduced to aleatory, but don't know where to start. So I have a set of 3, and they each sort of progress from pretty traditional graphic score to something that incorporates a little Western notation and then more Western notation in combination with. But so that I can encourage choristers to explore their own creativity, and conductors who maybe haven't explored working on graphic scores with their group can dive into that for the first time. So that should be premiered in the fall, and hopefully will be out by the spring.
Very cool. So nothing in a cave yet.
Nothing in a cave yet. I'm still waiting. If you're listening, call me.
All right.
Let's write a cave piece.
So if someone wants to contact you or learn more about your music, what's your website?
Katerina.com. And I'm on social on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Kat Gimon. You can find me in all those places. If you're on my website and scroll to the bottom, you can find links to all those. I also have a newsletter if you're more of an email type person and interested in hearing from me a couple times a year.
Fantastic. Well, hey, listeners out there, if you are already a sustaining member of Moveable Dough, I would like to offer my sincere thanks. Your contributions help me continue to provide quality programming like this. And if you're not yet a sustaining member, your time is now. Visit anchor.fm/movabledough and click support. For less than $1 a month, you can help me keep the music moving. Well, Katerina, it has been a pleasure to get to know you today. Thank you so much for joining me on Moveable Dough.
Thank you.
My guest today was composer Katerina Gimon. If you have a recommendation for a future guest or an idea for the show, please email me at movabledough@gmail.com. This is Steve Danielson. Keep the music moving.